The teacher had no idea that the man she was calling a liar's father would walk through her classroom door before the afternoon was over. She found out the hard way. It started with paper. Mrs. Evelyn Hargrove lifted Jamal Carter's essay from her desk with both hands and pulled it apart. Not in anger, not quickly, but slowly and deliberately, with the calm of someone who has already decided what something is worth. The tear ran straight down the center fold. A smaller piece broke free from the upper corner. All three pieces drifted to the floor at the foot of the second-row desk and landed at different angles on the linoleum. Jamal's desk. He was 10 years old, slight, with the particular stillness of a child who had learned early that being very still was a form of protection. Dark green hoodie, a navy backpack with one strap repaired with electrical tape. On the corner of his desk, a plastic lunch container with a cracked lid. Divided compartments, snap closure. 2 years of daily use visible in every scuff. He looked at the pieces of his essay on the floor. He did not move. Mrs. Hargrove turned to face the room. 32 people stared back. Parents in folding chairs arranged between the student desks. A few children still seated. Principal James Okafor near the back wall with his arms folded and his face arranged in the careful neutral of an administrator who preferred to observe before intervening. The fluorescent lights hummed. The room smelled like whiteboard marker and the closed-in warmth of a space that hadn't had its windows opened since morning. "I'm going to be direct," Mrs. Hargrove said. Measured, almost gentle. The tone of someone certain they are doing a difficult but necessary thing. She turned to Jamal. She pointed at him. Not gestured. Pointed. Arm extended, finger leveled, direct and unambiguous. "This story has no logic," she said. "You are lying about your father's job." The room went very still. She opened the manila folder on her desk, leaned forward, and read aloud. "Riverside Apartments, Unit 4C. She let that land. Then she looked at the parents, briefly, deliberately, and back at Jamal. "And this child wants us to believe that a man at that address runs a global corporation operating across 14 countries." Her voice carried the lift of someone presenting a contradiction they have already resolved. "That is not a story about hard work. That is a story that does not hold together." From the third row, a woman in a dark blazer laughed. Short, reflexive, escaped before she decided whether she meant it. Her phone was already in her hand, already tilted upward, the red recording light on. She had been waiting, it seemed, for the moment to become worth capturing. A man near the center shook his head slowly. "Teaching kids to fantasize about wealth," he said, mostly to the person beside him, but loud enough for the room. "Honestly, that's worse than just being poor." Jamal stood very still at his desk. He felt every eye in the room on him. He felt the weight of the torn essay on the floor. He felt his lunch container trembling at the edge of his desk, the faint vibration of a boy trying not to move too much, until a nearby chair scraped the linoleum and the container walked itself over the edge and dropped. The lid popped open. The rice his father had packed that morning, the sliced chicken, the orange sections arranged carefully in the divided compartments, all of it scattered across the floor in a loose fan. A wedge of orange rolled slowly and stopped against the leg of Mrs. Hargrove's desk. No one moved to pick it up. Jamal bent down and retrieved the container. He pressed the lid shut. His hands were not quite steady. He stood up straight. He looked at Mrs. Hargrove and at the recording phone, and at Principal Okafor, who still had not moved from the back wall, and at the boy in the front row studying his own desk with elaborate focus. Then, in a voice smaller than he intended, but holding its shape, "I'm not lying. My dad just doesn't want anyone to know." The room had already turned against him before he finished the sentence. The woman with the phone adjusted her angle upward. The man who had mentioned fantasy laughed again, the kind of laugh that gives a room permission to agree. A parent murmured something to the person beside them. The person beside them nodded. The nod traveled down the row the way these things do. One person's certainty becoming the next person's permission to feel certain. Jamal stood in the second row, holding his cracked lunch container in both hands, and did not look away. He did not cry. He did not recant. And 4 miles across the city, on the 14th floor of a building whose name every person in that room would have recognized, a phone was about to ring. The morning had started the way most of their mornings started. 6:45, and the apartment was already warm. Not from the building's heat, which ran on its own irregular logic, but from the stove. A pan on the front burner, onions softening in oil. Jamal had decided years ago that this was the smell of his father being in the middle of thinking something through. Marcus Carter stood at the counter in a white undershirt and work pants, canvas, reinforced at the knees, deep side pockets, moving through the morning without wasted motion. His phone sat face down on the counter beside him. It was a habit so consistent it had become invisible, like the way he always put his keys in the same jacket pocket, or the way he never raised his voice above the level required to be heard clearly. Small disciplines. He had hundreds of them. He was 48 years old. Broad through the shoulders, with the build that comes not from a gym, but from 20 years of being physically present in the operations of the things he owned. Walking warehouse floors, standing at loading docks at 5 in the morning, kneeling at server installations because he believed you could not fully understand a thing you had never touched. His hair was going gray at the temples. His hands showed it. No one who passed him on the street that morning, in the undershirt, in the work pants, in the olive canvas jacket with the Carter Logistics patch on the chest that read like a uniform because it was, technically, a uniform, would have seen anything other than a working man running through his day. That was, in a specific and considered way, the point. Jamal came out of his room already dressed. Dark green hoodie, dark jeans, the sneakers with the scuff on the left toe he kept meaning to cover with a marker. His backpack was already on, the electrical tape repair on the strap holding clean, the way it had been holding since February. He dropped into his chair and looked at what his father had already set out. Orange sections on a plastic plate, a glass of water. "You eat anything yet?" Marcus asked without turning. "I had water." Water is not something. Jamal pulled an orange section apart and ate it. Marcus divided the rest between the plate and the lunch container. Rice, chicken, the oranges in the divided compartments the way Jamal preferred, and pressed the lid down. He set it on the table beside Jamal's elbow. "Parent meeting today," Jamal said. Marcus turned the burner off. "I know. You coming?" He folded a dish towel once over the oven handle and pulled out the chair across from Jamal and sat down. Jamal had learned to pay attention to this. When his father sat down and stopped moving, what came next was not casual. "I've got a situation at the Oakland facility," Marcus said. "Routing system went down last night. I need to be on a call at 8, and I may need to fly out." "Okay. I'll get there if I can. If I can't, I'll send word to Principal Okafor." Jamal nodded. He looked at the table. "Hey." His father waited until Jamal looked up. "You know why we live here?" "Because of the school district." "Because of the school district." Marcus leaned forward, elbows on the table. "And because I want you to know what a grocery budget feels like, what rent feels like, what it means to pack your own lunch and carry it." He paused. "I didn't grow up with what I have now. I grew up 3 blocks from a school like Lincoln, and I want you to understand that world before you spend your life in the other one. You understand me?" "Yes, sir." "So when people ask what your father does, I say you work in logistics, and I keep the details private." Jamal said it the way you say something you've practiced until the words find their own groove. "I know, Dad. I know you know." Marcus looked at his son across the table. The green hoodie, the slight frame, the way Jamal's hand rested near the lunch container without seeming to notice it was doing so. Keeping quiet when someone gets something wrong about you takes a different kind of strength than speaking up. "What kind?" Marcus considered it. The kind that knows the truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time. Jamal turned another orange section in his fingers. But what if time takes too long? Marcus stood and took his work jacket from the back of his chair and shrugged it on. He picked up his phone from the counter, still face down, and slid it into his pocket. "Then your old man shows up," he said. The corner of his mouth moved, not quite a smile, but enough. He pressed his hand to the top of Jamal's head for a moment and walked to the door. Jamal finished the orange. He put the lunch container in his backpack. He walked to school. Lincoln Elementary sat at the far end of Claiborne Street. Solid brick, a new gymnasium added 6 years ago, a well-kept front walk. It served a district that included Riverside apartments and everything between Riverside and the neighborhood 3/4 of a mile north, where the houses had driveways and second cars, and school fundraisers that reliably exceeded their goals. Jamal existed in the middle of this geography, which was the precise position his father had chosen. Mrs. Evelyn Hargrove had taught 4th grade at Lincoln for 8 of her 25 years. She was genuinely competent in the things that could be measured: lesson structure, classroom management, the ability to make anxious children feel secure in the first 2 weeks. She had a shelf of commendation certificates above the whiteboard. She believed she was fair. What she could not see, had never had occasion to examine, was the slight adjustment in her voice when she returned Jamal's papers. The fraction of a beat before she called on him, as though she were running a quick calculation. The way her acknowledgement of his correct answers ran shorter than her acknowledgement of Tyler Meadows in the front row, whose father was an orthodontist in the next district over. These were not large things, not things a reasonable observer could have pointed to and named as policy. They were the small, consistent texture of a room in which one child understood, without being told, that he had to be more precise, more patient, and more invisible than the others. Jamal had been navigating this texture since September. He didn't have a name for it. He only knew how it felt when he answered correctly, and the response landed differently than it landed for the boy beside him. He knew the way his worn backpack and his cracked lunch container and his scuffed sneakers had a meaning in this room that they did not have in the apartment on the 4th floor of Riverside, where they were simply the things he used and carried. He did his work without drawing attention to it. He ate at the end of the lunch line. He picked up trash in the hallway without being asked because it seemed like a reasonable thing to do, and no one else was doing it. His essay had taken him 3 evenings. He'd researched carefully: supply chains, logistics networks, operating jurisdictions across multiple countries. His father didn't discuss specifics at home, kept everything low and casual. But Jamal had assembled the picture from dinner conversations and the business news that played low on the kitchen radio, and, once, a business card he'd found at the back of a kitchen drawer. He'd studied it for a long time and returned it exactly as he found it, face down, slightly angled, undisturbed. He was proud of that essay. Not loudly. In the private way you are proud of something you know to be exactly true. He had turned it in Thursday and not worried about it again until Friday morning, when Mrs. Hargrove asked him to stay after class and told him she had concerns. She did not say what those concerns were. She told him to come to the afternoon parent meeting prepared to discuss his work. He'd walked home and not told his father. He didn't want to worry him over something that would probably be fine. It was probably going to be fine. They made him stand up in front of them. Mrs. Hargrove asked him to bring his copy to the front of the room. She already held the graded copy, the torn one, and read it aloud. To the parents. All of them. There were 17 parents in attendance. Principal Okafor had arrived 5 minutes late and taken a position near the back wall, hands clasped, face in the careful patience of an administrator who observed before intervening. 3 students from the after-school enrichment program had been folded into the meeting room by accident, and now sat near the cubbies looking like they very much wished they hadn't been. The alphabet border ran along the top of the whiteboard. Construction paper fall leaves hung above the cubbies in orange and gold. The room smelled like dry erase marker and the residual warmth of an afternoon that had been sunny and was now cooling. Jamal stood at the front and read, "My father works in technology and logistics. He has worked in this field for over 20 years. He started his company when he was 26 years old, and it now operates in 14 countries. He manages thousands of people, and his decisions affect supply chains across 3 continents. He built this from nothing. That is why I want to study business and engineering when I get older. My father is my hero. Not because he is rich or powerful, but because he is honest and fair in everything he does." He stopped. He looked up. The room was quiet for a moment. The particular quiet of a group of people deciding how to respond to something. Then Mrs. Hargrove said, "You understand the problem." Not a question, an exhibition. The way a teacher displays a diagram of something that doesn't work. "There's nothing wrong with my essay," Jamal said. "The writing is fine. The content is the problem." She looked at the parents, then back at him. "The content asks this room to accept something the available information does not support." She opened the manila folder and held it forward, not showing it, just referencing it as a document, as something with weight. "I've looked at your family's records. I've done my due diligence. What I'm seeing does not match what you're describing." A parent near the center, a man in a gray fleece, the expensive hiking brand kind, shifted in his chair. "What do the records show?" Principal Okafor cleared his throat. "Jamal is a student in good standing who receives certain district-based support services." He said it with the careful neutrality of an administrator who means something specific. The woman with the phone, 3rd row, dark blazer, hair pulled back, recording light still red, said, "Support services, so the family receives assistance." "That's not," Okafor started. "I'm not judging, I'm establishing context." She looked at Jamal with the expression of someone who believed they were being kind. "Honey, it is not wrong to admire your dad, but when you say things in front of other children that aren't accurate, it creates problems. My daughter looks up to you. She talks about you at home, and tonight she's going to wonder if it's acceptable to make things up if it makes you feel better." A pause. "Is that the lesson we want?" "It's true," Jamal said, plainly. The woman adjusted her phone angle. "This child," she said, to the room now, not to Jamal, loud enough for the recording, "is ruining my son's conference. We came here for our children, not for this." She looked at Jamal directly. "I think you should apologize to this room for wasting everyone's time." Jamal said nothing. Mrs. Hargrove stepped forward. When she spoke again, her voice had dropped into the register she used for ultimatums. Calm, deliberate, with the finality of someone offering what they believe is mercy. "Jamal, I'm giving you one final opportunity." She let the room hold still before she continued. "Just admit that you made this up. Admit that you got carried away, that you wrote something that wasn't true, and we end this right now. Everyone goes home. No consequences." A pause. Then, quieter, low enough that the front rows heard it and the back rows had to lean forward. "Say it, and you will not lose your academic support." The room went completely silent. 17 parents. 3 students who had no idea how they'd ended up in the middle of this. Principal Okafor at the back wall, motionless. The fluorescent lights humming their single indifferent note. Jamal stood at the front of the room with his binder open in his hands. He thought about his father at the stove that morning. The face-down phone. The orange sections in the divided compartments. The business card at the back of the drawer, face down, slightly angled. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time. He closed his binder. "I'm not going to say that," he said, "because it isn't true." At the back of the room, the woman with the tote bag, she had not spoken yet, had been watching the whole thing with the focused stillness of someone taking inventory, opened her notebook and began to write. Mrs. Hargrove straightened. "Then I'm making a phone call. To verify. Because that is my obligation. Call whoever you need to, Jamal said. He walked back to his desk and looked at the window. Wait in the hallway, please, Jamal. The door closed behind him with the ordinary click of a latch that had been turned by the same hand for 8 years. The hallway was empty. The enrichment classes had moved to the gym. Overhead lights ran in a straight line down the ceiling and doubled in the linoleum below, creating the institutional brightness that should feel cheerful and never does. A handmade banner between the lockers read, "Lincoln Lions, proud, strong, kind." The K in kind had started to peel at the bottom left corner. He had walked past it every morning since September and was only noticing it now. He set his backpack against the wall and sat beside it. Through the door, the meeting continued. He couldn't make out the words, just the rhythm of voices back and forth, the pauses that meant someone was processing something. He had learned, growing up in his father's orbit, to read the temperature of a room by its rhythm alone. He didn't need words. He could feel the room through the door, the way you feel a current in water you can't see. He looked through the narrow gap where the door had swung back an inch. The two main halves of his essay were visible on the linoleum near his desk, face up, the torn edge catching the light from one of the overheads. He reached carefully through the gap, not opening the door further, not making noise, and dragged the closest half toward him. It slid across the linoleum and stopped against the doorframe. He reached in again for the second half, then the two smaller scraps that had broken loose from the tear. He laid all 4 pieces on his thigh and looked at them. The tear ran diagonally across the second paragraph, splitting the sentence about 3 continents into 2 separate and incomplete things. The edges didn't align cleanly. Along the center of the tear there was a gap the size of a thumbnail where a piece had gone missing entirely, and across the seam of the 2 main halves, "My dad." Split down the center. The M and the Y on the left side, the D and the A and the D on the right. The capital D riding slightly higher than it should, the word fractured at its most visible point. He sat with the 4 pieces on his lap and looked at it. Then he unzipped the front pocket of his backpack and found the small roll of Scotch tape he kept for his binder dividers. He pulled a strip free and began. He worked carefully, small strips, pressed down with his thumbnail, bridging the seam from the back. The paper was thin, and the tape had lost some of its grip, and the alignment wasn't perfect. The repaired edge bubbled in 2 places. The tape turned white in the hallway light. The thumbnail gap in the center of the second paragraph remained. Nothing to bridge it with, nothing to fill it in. He kept going. He pressed "my" against Dad and held them together. Down the hall, a door opened. 2 boys from the grade above his passed him walking fast, arguing about something he couldn't follow. One of them glanced at the paper on his lap and glanced away. Then slower footsteps. Sophia, 2 seats behind him in math, someone whose relationship to him had shifted in ways he'd never fully understood, stopped a few feet away. "Are you in trouble?" she asked. "No," he said. "Is that the essay? About your dad?" "Yeah." "Is it true? What you said in there?" He looked at her. Her face had the expression he had learned to recognize, the face of someone who wants something to be true, but has already made their peace with it not being true, and finds that peace more comfortable than the alternative. "Yeah," he said. "It's true." She looked at the essay for another moment. Then she went back through her door. Jamal pressed the last strip of tape across the seam and held the 2 main halves up to the hallway light. "My dad" ran together again, imperfectly, the tape visible, the D still sitting a fraction high, the thumbnail gap still open in the paragraph below. But together. Held. He folded it gently along the repaired seam and slid it into the front sleeve of his binder. From inside the room, the rhythm changed. A single voice now, not 2. A pause longer than the others. Then the sound of a number being dialed. He straightened his back against the wall. He looked at the banner. Proud, strong, kind. the K still peeling. He held the lunch container in both hands and waited. Mrs. Hargrove had found the number through the district's business partnership database. It was the publicly listed main line for Carter Logistics. She had no expectation of reaching anyone significant. At best, she had told herself before dialing, she would reach a receptionist who would confirm that no executive named Marcus Carter was associated with this address, who would suggest politely that the child had found the name somewhere and built a fiction around it. A polite dead end. The kind that lets you say, firmly and with documentation, that you checked. The number rang twice. Carter Logistics, Executive Suite. How may I direct your call? She hadn't expected Executive Suite. She straightened slightly. Yes, my name is Evelyn Hargrove. I'm a fourth-grade teacher at Lincoln Elementary in Arlington. I'm trying to verify information about an individual named Marcus Carter in connection with a student. A brief pause. Not the pause of someone searching a database. Something more deliberate than that. I'm sorry. Did you say Marcus Carter? Yes, Ma'am, I'm going to need to put you on a brief hold. Is that all right? It was not quite a question. The hold music began before she fully processed it. Not the hold music of a small company. It had the quality of something commissioned. Low strings, nothing recognizable. The sound of an organization that had thought carefully about what its hold music communicated. The room, which had been murmuring at a low level around her, went quiet. Parents in the folding chairs turned. The woman with the phone had lowered hers, the recording still running. The angle, now less aggressive, pointed more toward the floor. Principal Okafor had moved from the back wall to a position where he could see Mrs. Hargrove's face directly. The hold lasted perhaps 40 seconds. It felt considerably longer. A new voice came on. Male, older. A voice that chose its words and didn't rush them. This is Warren Cho. I'm the Chief Communications Officer for Carter Logistics. I understand you're making an inquiry about Marcus Carter? Mrs. Hargrove's grip on the phone tightened. Yes, I'm a fourth-grade teacher, and I have a student who has made certain claims in a class assignment about his father being involved in... Mrs. Hargrove. Not unkind. Careful in the way that certain kinds of professional care can feel like a warning. I can't discuss details about our leadership on an unverified call. A pause. Precise. But I'll tell you this. If you're talking about who I think you're talking about, you should be careful. Silence on the line. I'm not sure she started. I think you understand well enough, Warren Cho said. Then, lower, placing it like a final item on a table. Whatever position you're currently taking, be very certain of it before you go any further. For everyone's sake. The line disconnected. Mrs. Hargrove stood at the front of her room with the phone at her side. She looked at the floor near Jamal's desk. The torn essay halves. The dried rice on the linoleum. The wedge of orange still resting against the leg of her desk. She looked at the manila folder. She looked at the address. What did they say? Someone asked. Not accusatory, just asking. She did not answer. Principal Okafor was watching her with the expression of a man who has felt the floor shift beneath one foot and hasn't yet decided whether to move the other. The man in the gray fleece had uncrossed his legs and leaned forward. The woman with the phone had set hers down entirely, face down on the chair beside her. The only person still writing was the woman with the tote bag at the back. She wasn't looking at Mrs. Hargrove. She was looking at her notebook, writing steadily, with the focused attention of someone who has decided the details are worth having on record. I think, Principal Okafor said quietly, we should wait. Wait for what? The filming woman said. No one answered. In the hallway, through the inch-wide gap in the door, Jamal felt the room change. The back and forth had stopped. The silences were longer. The room had moved into a different register, not the register of certainty, but something more uncertain, more careful. A room that has begun to reconsider and doesn't yet know what it is reconsidering toward. He thought about his father's voice at the breakfast table that morning. The truth doesn't need defending. It just needs time. He thought, maybe not that much time. He looked at the door. The hallway door, the one from the main office corridor, opened at 3:47. Jamal heard it before he turned. A door with purpose behind it. Not loud, just certain. He looked up. His father was walking toward him. Marcus Carter was still in the work jacket, olive canvas, collar faded, the Carter Logistics patch on the left chest. His work pants still carried a press of gray dust across one knee from the server floor installation in Oakland that morning, which he had not stopped to address because addressing it was not the point. He walked at the pace of a man who has been calm for a very long time and has chosen to remain calm, which is a more deliberate thing than simply never having been otherwise. Behind him, through the door he'd come through, two men in dark clothing stood in the main office corridor. They did not enter. They simply stood, the quiet of people whose presence is itself the statement. Marcus saw Jamal against the wall and stopped. He stood there and looked at his son. The backpack, the green hoodie, the cracked lunch container on the floor, the binder on his lap with the edge of the taped essay visible through the front sleeve. He crossed the remaining distance and crouched down to Jamal's level, eye to eye, the way he always did when something mattered. "You all right?" he said. "Yes, sir." Marcus looked at the lunch container on the floor. The cracked lid, the dried smear along the corner. A meal packed at 6:45 that morning with care, now sitting on a school hallway floor. He reached into his jacket and took out a folded white handkerchief, plain cotton, initialed MC at the corner, and handed it to Jamal without explanation. Jamal wiped the lid. It came clean. Marcus stood. He put his hand briefly on the top of Jamal's head. Then he pushed the classroom door open and walked in. The room registered him in stages. The first stage was wrong. Several parents processed the work jacket and the dust on his knee and read him as a late arrival or a maintenance worker. Their bodies adjusted accordingly, relaxing slightly, not yet paying full attention. The second stage came fast. He was not moving toward the parent seating area. He was moving toward the front of the room with a focused deliberateness that didn't fit either category, and the room's attention followed him without being invited to. Marcus crossed directly to Jamal's desk. He looked at the floor around it, the torn essay pieces that had slid under the desk, been stepped on, come to rest against the chair leg. He bent down and collected them all, one by one, smoothing each flat against his palm with the same unhurried precision he brought to everything. He stood. He turned to Principal Okafor and held out a business card between two fingers. Okafor took it. His eyes moved over it. His face changed, small, but the kind of change a room can feel even when it cannot see it clearly. Marcus looked at the room, at the parents, at the face-down phone on the chair, at the man in the gray fleece with both hands suddenly flat on his knees, at Principal Okafor, still holding the card. "I am Jamal's father," he said. He said it the way he stated most facts, without performance, without waiting to see how it landed. "My name is Marcus Carter." The room was completely still. The fluorescent lights hummed. Outside the window, a school bus pulled away from the curb with its amber lights blinking. None of the 17 parents appeared to notice. Marcus turned to face Mrs. Evelyn Hargrove. She was standing behind her desk. 25 years of classroom experience kept her surface intact. She did not step back, did not flinch. But something in the architecture of her expression had shifted, the way a room looks different when the light source changes. She was recalibrating, trying to find the position that was still defensible. "Mrs. Hargrove," he said. She raised her chin. "You taught my son about logic today." He held the torn essay pieces in his hand as he spoke. "And you used it to tell a room full of people that a child from Riverside Apartments could not have a father who built something, that a certain address is evidence of a certain limit." He paused, not for effect, but because the next part needed its own space. That is the most illogical thing said in this room today. At the back, the woman with the tote bag had stopped writing. She was looking at Marcus with the expression of someone who had suspected something for a long time and was watching it become visible. "I am not here for an apology to me," Marcus said. He looked at Mrs. Hargrove directly. "I have walked into rooms like this my entire career. I know what it costs, and I know what it costs the person holding the assumption. That accounting is between you and yourself." He let that rest. "But I want you to do something." He set the essay pieces on the edge of her desk, gently, the way you set down something damaged that still has value. "Don't apologize to me," he said. "Apologize to that lunchbox." A parent made a small sound. Not a laugh, not a gasp. Something between. The sound a room makes when it understands something it wasn't expecting to understand. "That lunchbox is what my son carries into this building every single day, with everything he has in the way of dignity. I packed it this morning. I put oranges in it because he likes oranges. It hit your classroom floor today, and no one picked it up." He looked at her steadily. "That is what I want you to apologize for." Mrs. Hargrove opened her mouth. She closed it. Marcus nodded once, acknowledging something, and turned and walked to the door. He stepped into the hallway, where Jamal was now standing, binder in hand. Marcus took the lunch container from the floor. He carried it to the small custodial sink at the end of the hall, ran water over the handkerchief, and cleaned the container with the methodical care of someone who does things completely. Inside the divided sections, around the cracked corner of the lid, along the edges where the rice had dried. He rinsed the cloth. He dried the container. He carried it back into the room. Every eye followed him. He crossed to Jamal's desk. Jamal had come in behind him and taken his seat, sitting very straight, and set the clean container in front of his son. He rested one hand on Jamal's shoulder for a moment. Then he straightened and faced the room. "Thank you for being here," he said. "To all 17 parents, to Principal Okafor, to the 3 students near the back who had no idea how they'd ended up in the middle of this. I think we should talk about what happens next," Mrs. Hargrove apologized. It took her 2 attempts to find the right language. The first attempt was professional. She had acted without complete information, should have used proper channels, had allowed a parent meeting to become something it should not have been. These were the correct things to say. They were also still a form of management, and somewhere in the middle of them her voice slowed, and she seemed to hear herself from a slight distance, and she stopped. She looked at Jamal. He was sitting at his desk near the window, his father having stepped back, and he was looking at her with the same steadiness he had held all afternoon. Not anger, not relief, just presence. The look of someone who had been certain the whole time and was waiting for the room to catch up. "I was wrong," she said. The management language had left her voice. What remained was simpler. "I looked at what I knew about your family, and I decided what that meant, and I was wrong to do that. And I said it in front of this room, which made it worse." She stopped. "I'm sorry, Jamal." He held her gaze. He gave one small nod. Not forgiveness. He was 10 years old, and the afternoon was still 2 hours close, and forgiveness is not something you find in that much distance. Just acknowledgement. That he had heard her. That he was still there. Principal Okafor addressed the room from the front, without the desk between him and the parents. "What happened in this room today should not have happened," he said. A student was publicly questioned about his honesty in front of his peers and their families, based on assumptions drawn from incomplete information. He was sent out of his own classroom while the adults inside continued a conversation about him. He looked around the room, briefly, without accusation, but without evasion. "I was present. I did not intervene as early as I should have. That is a failure I take responsibility for." The woman who had been filming raised her hand. What happens with the recording? Okafor looked at her evenly. That is your decision to make. What I can tell you is that I intend to contact every family in this room with a written account of what occurred today and what corrective steps this school will take. She put her hands down. Marcus spoke last. He stood near Jamal's desk, not at the front, not in the teacher's position, but in the space where a father stands when he is speaking as a father. I want to be clear about something, he said. This is not about who I am or what I've built. I know that's difficult to separate from this afternoon, but I want to try. He looked at the room. My family made a choice to live simply. I made that choice, for my son, because I wanted him to know what the world is made of before he moves through the more protected parts of it. I calculated the costs of that choice. He paused. I did not calculate this one. My son paid a price today that I didn't anticipate. That is on me. He turned to Jamal as he said it. Directly. Not past him, not over him. At him. I'm sorry, Marcus said quietly. For what today cost you. That wasn't something you should have had to carry alone. Jamal looked at his father. He blinked once, slowly, and his shoulders came down half an inch. The release of something that had been held for hours, the kind that has nowhere to go but inward. He had been carrying the weight of being misunderstood since before he could name it, and now the one person who knew the full weight of it was acknowledging it out loud, in front of the same room that had piled it on. And the relief of that was the kind that does not announce itself, but simply settles. I know why we do it, Jamal said quietly. I was just... He looked at the window for a moment. I know. Marcus held his gaze for a moment longer. Then he turned back to the room. What I care about going forward, he said, is that what happened to my son today doesn't happen to the next child who walks into this building without my particular resources. That child has the same right to be believed in this room. That's the conversation I'd like to have. He looked at Okafor. If you're willing. I am, Okafor said. They shook hands. Outside in the parking lot, the conversation lasted 15 minutes. Okafor listened more than he spoke, which was the right ratio. Marcus talked about the parent meeting protocol, how student work was discussed, how families were notified, how the social weight of 17 parents bearing down on a child in a folding chair was not neutral ground. He mentioned the implicit bias training that had been scheduled and deferred twice. He mentioned it without heat, as a matter of record. Okafor added to an internal list as they talked. He was the kind of principal more interested in the school functioning correctly than in defending how it had functioned, which is rarer than it should be. I'm not pursuing legal action, Marcus said. I want the school to work correctly. I'll be in touch before the end of the week, Okafor said. I know you will, Marcus said. Courteous, specific. He shook Okafor's hand and walked to the car, where Jamal was leaning against the passenger door with his face tilted up toward the October sky, the low afternoon light that enters at a sideways angle and makes shadows longer than they should be. Hey, Marcus said. Jamal looked at him. You held it, Marcus said. Yeah. Marcus opened the driver's door. Get in. I know a place. The ice cream shop was called Sal's. 4 blocks from Riverside, on the corner of Mercer and 5th, in the small commercial strip between the laundromat and the tire shop. Hand-painted sign. A cracked front step that had been cracked as long as Jamal could remember. A menu board, updated in marker by whoever was working, the handwriting different week to week. Jamal had been coming here since he was 4. The man behind the counter was Denny. About 60, gray mustache, the ease of someone who has spent a long career making children happy without needing to announce it. He looked up when the door opened. Marcus, he said. Denny. He looked at Jamal with the frank consideration of someone deciding whether today called for the usual thing or something different. Rough afternoon? Denny said. Little bit, Jamal said. Usual? Please. Denny made the combs. Chocolate with the caramel ribbon, dragged in a slow spiral before the scoop went on, the way he'd been doing it for years. He handed Jamal's across the counter and started to say something. Then he stopped. He looked at Marcus. Marcus gave the smallest shake of his head, barely a movement, more a settling. On me today, Denny said. Jamal looked at the cone. He looked at Denny. Then he reached into his jacket pocket and found the folded $5 bill his father had taught him to keep in the seam pocket, for situations where paying your own way was the point. Thank you, Jamal said. But I've got it. Denny held his gaze for a moment. Then he smiled, quiet, real, and took the 5 and rang it up and made change. 3 cents and a receipt. Jamal folded the receipt and put it in his pocket. He sat in the chair by the window next to his father. The chair rocked slightly on its uneven legs. He steadied it with his heel. Outside, Mercer Street moved through its ordinary afternoon. A woman with a stroller, a man on a bicycle cutting the intersection without stopping, a pigeon engaged in the single-minded pursuit of a discarded fast food bag. They sat for a while without talking. Then Jamal said, I don't need people to believe who you are, Dad. Marcus turned to look at him. I just need you to believe in me, Jamal said. He wasn't looking at his father when he said it. He was looking out at the bicycle, now 3 blocks gone, and the pigeon who had won something from the bag and was carrying it away with purpose. He said it the way you say something you have been thinking all afternoon and have finally found the right moment and the right words for. Marcus was quiet for a moment. I always have, he said, before anything else about today. That has always been true. Jamal took a bite of his cone. The chocolate was cold, and the caramel ribbon was dark and slightly bitter and exactly right. The chair rocked. Mercer Street did what it did. The October light lay across the table between them in a band of ordinary gold. His father set one hand on the table, not reaching, just there. Jamal covered it briefly with his own. Then he went back to his cone. In the days that followed, the school moved. Not loudly, not in the performed way of institutions demonstrating remorse. In the actual way. Incremental, unglamorous, administrative. A building deciding to function differently. Principal Okafor's letter went out to every family who had attended the meeting, and to every family in Mrs. Hargrove's class. 2 pages, specific, written in the direct language of a man who had decided accuracy was more honest than protection. It named the incident. It named the failure. It described what would change. Mrs. Hargrove went on professional development leave the following Monday. Not terminated, placed in a district program that had been pending for 2 years and never prioritized. She returned in November to a rearranged classroom. She began calling on the children near the back first. She started keeping a second set of notes on her own patterns. Whether that was enough was a question that would take years to answer, and Jamal was not responsible for answering it. Jamal went back to class on Monday. His cubby had a library book and a spare pencil, same as always. That afternoon he found a folded note wedged behind the library book from Dev. No greeting, no explanation, just the words, I should have said something, in careful block letters. Jamal put it in the front pocket of his binder, behind the taped essay. He kept both. The essay was eventually graded, not by Mrs. Hargrove, but by Ms. Arnett, the 5th grade reading specialist, who had no stake in any of it and read it twice. She wrote at the bottom in red ink, exceptional use of specific evidence. Voice is clear and confident. A. Jamal kept that, too. The woman with the tote bag, her name was Constance Briggs, and she worked for the district's Parent Equity Review Office, submitted her notes to the Equity Board. The report that followed recommended 2 things: a revision of the parent meeting protocol across all district elementary schools, and a mandatory bias awareness module for instructional staff. The superintendent signed the order 3 weeks later. None of this undid the afternoon. Jamal knew that. The afternoon had happened, and the essay was taped in his binder, and the lunch container still had the crack in the corner of the lid. These were permanent things, the way most things are permanent once they've occurred. But what comes after is also permanent. On a Thursday in November, a woman stopped Marcus in the parking lot before the rescheduled parent-teacher conference. One of the ordinary ones from that afternoon. Not the woman with the phone, not Constance Briggs, just one of the ones who had sat in a folding chair and watched and said nothing. She didn't apologize exactly. She said, "I have a daughter in 2nd grade. I've been thinking about that afternoon." A pause. "I want to do better. I wanted you to know." Marcus looked at her for a moment. "Tell her," he said. "Not me. Tell your daughter what you saw that day, and what you wish you'd done." The woman nodded. She walked back toward the building. Marcus stood in the parking lot. The school looked the way it always looked. Solid brick, new gymnasium visible from the side angle. The main entrance banner reading, "Lincoln Lions. Proud, strong, kind." The K was still peeling. He made a note to mention it to Okafor. On the last Friday of October, Jamal sat at the kitchen table after school with his binder open in front of him. The kitchen smelled like onion and warm oil. His father was at the stove, same undershirt, same face-down phone on the counter, same unhurried movement through the same small space. Jamal took out the taped essay and laid it flat on the table. The tape had yellowed slightly at the edges. The thumbnail gap in the center of the second paragraph was still there. The words, "my dad," still crossed the seam. The D sitting a fraction high on the right half, the repair visible if you knew where to look. He took out a fresh sheet of notebook paper. He wrote the title at the top. He wrote the essay again, mostly the same words, the same structure, the same facts he had researched and verified, and stood behind in front of a room full of people who had not wanted to believe him. And when he reached the final paragraph, he stopped. He wrote, "The bravest thing my father ever did was not the thing that made him successful. The bravest thing was trusting me with his secret and teaching me to stay quiet about things that were true. I understand now why that matters. Someday I will explain it to someone the way he explained it to me." He read it back. He thought about changing it. He didn't change it. He put the new essay behind the old one in the front sleeve of the binder and closed it. From the stove, his father said, "Dinner in 10. "Okay," Jamal said. The apartment was warm. The lamp was on. Outside, Mercer Street moved through its early November evening. A stroller, a bicycle, the pigeon with its urgent and perpetual agenda. The cold November light had replaced October's at a lower angle, coming in through the window sideways and lying flat across the kitchen table, and across the closed binder, and across the boy sitting quietly in front of it. Inside, a boy sat at a kitchen table, and his father cooked without hurrying, and the room held the two of them in the ordinary warmth of an evening that had been earned. The K on the hallway banner was still peeling, but the essay was whole.